Whose economy is this, really? Who gets the credit for any data we get?
It's a funny, very D.C. question. I think the reality is, if you look at the economy that President Trump inherited, it was an economy with roughly 3% growth, unemployment around 4%, inflation coming down towards 2%. And I think the chair of the CEA is right that the hard data has not changed all that much. The thing that has changed a lot in the last 4 months is things like forecasts for growth, recession risks, what consumers are saying about the economy, what businesses are saying about the economy. And so the way that I think about today's report really is, it's true, it was a resilient report. There were some concerning signs like the downward revisions to past months. You're starting to see some federal layoffs associated with DOGE. But I think the question is, when do those tariff-induced price increases start to hit in a way that hits at incomes, hits at consumer spending, and starts to then really impact the labor market? And can the administration act quickly enough to reverse some of its tariff policies in order to prevent that from happening? Because if they can't, I think we are probably headed to a worse weakening in the labor market and likely a recession.
Well, so what is your assessment of when that could happen? Because already we're seeing port authorities. Gene Soroka, who runs one of the ports out off Los Angeles, was on earlier today talking about how already you're seeing cargo volume, ships coming from China. That is slowing down. And if they're not coming now, they're not bringing the goods that are needed for back to school season or Halloween, maybe even into Christmas. So how quickly could this actually catch up in the hard figures?
I think we're seeing some concerning leading indicators like the one you mentioned. We know anecdotally things like the de minimis exemption ending today could lead to price increases starting as soon as next week or a few weeks after that. And then it really is a cycle of things that should happen in the economy where first the prices go up, you see then the hits to real incomes, and that's when consumption starts to slow and businesses will hire less or conduct layoffs. And so I think there probably still is some time for the administration to move if they move very, very quickly. But it also takes a very long time for trade deals to happen, as you know. And so I think the important thing will be for them to signal some deals as quickly as possible. And then the big issue, of course, is China, where that really is where the reason why the effective tariff rate has gone up so much. And so you need quick resolution on that. And that's what I think most analysts would say is very, very difficult for this administration to get.
Well, you're starting to see maybe some more positive signals on China specifically. But President Trump obviously has been fielding a lot of questions about those negotiations with China and the impact of these tariffs overall. And he interestingly had this response earlier this week when asked about the potential for empty shelves as part of this. And this is what he said.
You know, somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know, and maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
I don't know if you see that as recognition of just economic reality on the part of President Trump, but the fact of the matter is it might not just be dolls we're talking about. How could we see kind of an emptying of shelves of things that are critical to the U.S. economy or to the manufacturing sector specifically that the president says these policies are intended to reignite?
Yeah, well, it'll be things like dolls, the president mentioned, toys, appliances, clothes. The list really goes on. And, I think the comment somehow indicates, and other comments from the administration indicate that maybe people should just buy less stuff or buy more expensive stuff, and that would be okay. I think it's really not that complicated. The reason people buy inexpensive things is because they don't make enough money to afford things that are more expensive. And so when you basically tell people that their prices are going to go up, but that's okay, what you're doing is lowering living standards for lower-income people, middle-income people, just the people who President Trump's economic message was really designed to appeal to.
Well, and he's kind of referred to that as being some short-term pain that might be experienced, or disruptions is another way that he's phrased this. All of it, he says, is in it trying to achieve a longer-term objective, which is more U.S. manufacturing, more balanced trade, potentially more in the Treasury's coffers. Do you see a way economically where actually that can all come about based off of these policies?
I think one of the challenges, the list that you gave, more manufacturing here, more revenue, those are contradictory. Are we trying to get more manufacturing in the United States? Are we trying to permanently replace the income tax? It's hard to know because you hear different things from different members of the administration. What I would say, if the goal is to try to produce more critical things in the United States, that's a very important goal that should be coupled with investment in key sectors. The challenge is when you say we're going to try to bring production of almost everything to the United States, what that will do is make people poorer, reduce corporate profits for businesses, and lead to a smaller economy where people's incomes are lower.
Well, and whether it's that economic reality we ultimately face or a different one, we all have the question as to how the Federal Reserve is going to respond to it. Now that you're outside of the White House apparatus, you're hopefully a little bit more free to answer this question. I'm so used to saying I respect
the independence, but go ahead.
Well, and President Trump says he has no intention of firing the chairman, but that hasn't stopped him from repeatedly saying that Powell risks being too late, and he thinks they need to cut interest rates now, knowing that monetary policy and the rate mechanism itself will operate with a lag, that if they wait for the data in hand, by the time easier policy kicks in, it may not be able to have an immediate effect. Do you see a point to that argument? Is Chairman Powell going to end up being too late no matter what?
I think that President Trump has put Chairman Powell in a real bind, because the reality is that normally if we see labor market softening, what we would see alongside that is a benign inflation outlook that would make the choice quite easy to cut rates. But if what we see is a couple firm CPI and PCE readings on the good side, and maybe some labor market weakening that lags that higher inflation, I think it will be challenging for the Fed to act as quickly as they need to. And so that, I think, really speaks to the difficult position that President Trump and the tariff policies have put the Fed in.
If you got the chance to ask the chairman a question at his press conference next week, knowing he has to dance around a lot of tough questions these days, what does he most need to answer for? What do you want to hear from him?
I think I'd want to know when precisely the labor market weakening is enough that he would need to act regardless of where the inflation picture was. So, is it the unemployment rate going up? Is he going to act more quickly if we simply see some moves in the claims data as we did this week? I think that's going to be the most important question for him. I do think if I were Chair Powell, though, the most important question for me would be, when is President Trump going to act to more swiftly try to take some of these tariff rates down? Because without that, it's very hard to see much progress here.